Hi everyone, spoilers ahead for The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and anything Middle-earth related. Hey everybody, welcome once again to a very special episode of The Script Department. Today we have guests in the house. Hi guests. I'm joined by Jake and James, old friends and filmmakers and founders of the Tolkien lore channel, The Broken Sword. Welcome, welcome, welcome. But before we get into it, please feel free to like, share, subscribe, all of that stuff, and go back down our timeline to see what we have going on. Also, definitely pop over to The Broken Sword. They've got loads and loads of good stuff over there. We are going to be celebrating The Lord of the Rings all week here on the Script Department channel, so definitely stick around, see what we have going on. But today, we're looking specifically at adaptation, using The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit as kind of case studies for that. But first and foremost, and most importantly, welcome. Take your shoes off. Get comfy. Welcome to the place.
Thank you.
How are you guys doing? You doing okay?
We're supposed to take our shoes off.
We were supposed
to
take
your shoes off. Well, you can leave them on if you. I just meant get comfy. That's reasonable. That's reasonable. So we know each other going way back. Way back.
We do.
If you want to reveal our ages, then yeah, way back.
I don't think we want to take. We don't want to take too many trips down memory lane. People don't need to hear those stories.
It's for the best for all of us. I think that we keep that between ourselves. But in a previous life, I was an actor, and in a previous life, these two employed me to do things like that, and.
Yes, acting things.
Yes, Marcus was a good actor as well. I'll throw that out.
Yeah. Oh, now, come on! I wasn't expecting all this. But we've worked together recently as well.
The first thing that comes to my mind is you getting shot in the head by you.
Yeah.
That happened a lot. I feel.
Yeah, it did.
There was quite a lot of being shot in the head by you, and dressing up as Nightwing was a particular high point of mine.
That was a good one. That was a good one.
I was a bit skinnier then, so I could get away with it.
It'd
be a bit more of a grotesque image these days, I think. But yeah, we've worked together recently as well. So do you want to say a little bit to that point? Your headphones falling out again, Jake. This is going super well.
That's going to keep happening.
Congratulations on that. Do you want to speak a little bit to that? There's a video over on your channel with a few points on that project, but do you want to introduce it a little bit and tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so over on our Tolkien lore channel, we have a Patreon page, and all the pledges and donations and support that we get through Patreon essentially goes towards a budget of a short film project we're working on. Marcus was, brought in, I guess you could say, as the writer, because he's far better with that sort of stuff than we are, that's for sure. And we discussed back and forth, come up with a story, and Marcus wrote a script, sent it to us, and we were blown away by it. It was phenomenal. So yeah, we're still kind of, I guess you could say, fundraising through Patreon. But we've kind of moved into pre-production. We've got character designs. We looked at costume designs, and I guess soon we'll start casting. So yeah, I'm excited for that one.
Well, if you need anyone to be shot in the head, then you know where to go. Because
it'd be by an arrow this time, not a gun. So
yeah, that's true, I suppose. And that's kind of what makes this such an interesting conversation, because apart from anything else, you guys are you're filmmakers initially and first and foremost, I'd say, from my point of view anyway, just from knowing you as long as I have.
Yeah.
Sure. And then the stuff that you've done with the Broken Sword and Lord of the Rings, but then also, I mean, this isn't a Tolkien thing, because of course it isn't, but the themes and the ideas and things like that we are run quite closely to Tolkien's work and to Middle Earth and things like that, which is why I kind of wanted to talk to you about adaptation, and this being kind of a script-based channel and things like that. We're all writers here, so we all look at things from a screenplay point of view. And so I thought it'd be really interesting to chat to you guys about how successfully you think The Lord of the Rings actually manages that, and how the jump from a novel to film actually work. Do you feel as if Peter Jackson's vision for Lord of the Rings really kind of stands up to Tolkien's? And what do you think?
Broad question to start.
Such a broad question.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, in general, I think it holds up very well. as long as you're not too much of a stickler for the specifics.
Yeah,
As long as you can accept an adaptation is an adaptation, not a remake, then I think it does an amazing job, personally.
yeah. I think it's an interesting question as well, because the funny thing is we've obviously got two books that were written by the same man, Mr. Tolkien. We've got The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, that were both adapted into film trilogies by the same man, Peter Jackson. Both were done very differently and both were received very differently. So we've kind of got two perspectives of two different adaptations.
This is
I think
this
The
is
Lord
one
of
of
the
the things
Rings
I want to.
was certainly. Sorry. Go on.
Yeah, I kind of want to come to that, because the Hobbit, and we'll touch on the Hobbit a little bit later on, because they are so different, and I think they're two different, as you say, they're two really different processes of adaptation there. Because I think for starters, with the Lord of the Rings, you have 3 books into 3 films, whereas the Hobbit, you have 1 book into 3 films, and there's a lot more that they've kind of had to add in there and whatnot to make that work. But to stick on the Lord of the Rings for the moment, the thing that gets me in terms of adapting it, and I think why it works quite so successfully, is thematic, and the way that they so brilliantly lift those kind of themes of love and courage and all these wonderful things, and deposit them down again. And the richness of the world that Tolkien builds, I think. Would you agree that on a thematic basis, it really hits home, or do you think there are things maybe that perhaps it misses?
No, I 100% agree that it definitely hits, because a lot of people, let's say purists, Tolkien purists, will perhaps complain, oh, Tom Bombadil's not in the film, or Glorfindel's not in the film. It's not a true representation of Tolkien's idea. But at the end of the day, Tolkien's idea is presenting this story of courage, like you said, friendship. The fact that no matter how small or insignificant one person may feel, they can change the world. They can make a difference. And I think the trilogy of films brings that across as well as the books. It's a hit from me.
I'd agree.
Yeah, and I was going to say, to add to that as well, it's where the adaptation part comes in, where certain bits where those themes can be shown in a book need to be altered slightly for a movie. Like when you look at a character like Aragorn in the book, he is very much he already knows what he is. He's always the same person, basically, from when you meet him to the end. Whereas in the movie, you need that character arc, and that's where the adaptation kind of comes into it. Where, okay, technically you've changed the character quite a bit, but in terms of telling the story and the overall idea of it, I don't think it changed anything, and it makes it all the same themes come across, but through adaptation.
For sure. I mean, because what you have there with the Lord of the Rings books is a huge resource of stuff and information. And interestingly, I was doing, before this chat, and actually in in preparation for the project we've been put together, I was looking into how they brought Lord of the Rings to the screen and things like that. And it's an interesting story, because originally the plan was to make 2 films, and they were going to compress the Lord of the Rings, the 3 books, into 2 films. And it just seems mad to me that would even happen, when you think that we have a theatrical cut and then 3 huge extended editions that wouldn't even fit onto 1 DVD, and they were going to try and put that into 2 films. That just seems mad to me. Why?
Yeah, I can't even imagine the world that we would be living in today if that had happened.
I know. I mean, at the end, most of those things always just come down to budget, though, don't they? They just go, oh, we want to make it cheaper. And they basically went, hey, well, we could do the same thing in 3 movies. Because I'm pretty sure there was even things like they were going to merge Gondor and Rohan as just men and that kind of thing. They were going to do stupid things like that. I say stupid things, like you never know how it would have turned out. You don't have a clue yet. You've never seen it. But but they were definitely going to make some bigger alterations than they would actually manage to do in the end.
Yeah.
Something I find... For sure.
Something I find really interesting is when you look at an audience, a generic audience, let's say, who are just looking at the Lord of the Rings as a whole, as a story, right, as entertainment, whether it's the book or whether it's the movies, people kind of forget and kind of cloud over the fact that they're 2 very, very, very different mediums, right, literature and film, and things that work in a book definitely don't always work on screen. We forget that in a book, whether a character is talking or whether you're reading the narration or whatnot, everything is just being described to you. And one sentence in a book can be very hard to put across in one shot in a film, if that makes sense. So things have to be added, things have to be removed, and people forget that.
I think you're right. I think that the thing for me with adapting this is that they managed to get hold of they managed to bring the richness to the screen, because what Tolkien has in his work is a huge amount of backstory. And he I think he quite famously has said he was writing a mythology for England and looking at that kind of thing. And so you have all of this work that has gone into the background of these books and things like that, that are reflected in his work. And what I think that it does really, really well is to bring that to the forefront in a visual way, because whilst you can describe these elements in literature and you can imagine them, you can't have that thread of visual continuity. So this led to this, led to this, led to this, and that's why we have this style of swords, or this style of art or statues, or whatever it might be. And I think it just captures it so well. It makes it feel as though it's a real living, breathing world. And we see that with with this great way that they set things up and then they pay them off. And that of course comes from the books as well. But in a visual way, you see Aragorn, we see the sword of the king. And we see that first in the Fellowship, where Isildur uses it to cut the ring from Sauron. We then see it in Rivendell, where Boromir picks it up and lets it fall to the ground, and then Aragorn picks it up and places it gently back down again, which is just a great moment of character. It tells us everything we need to know about those people, the sorrow and Aragorn and all this, that, and the other. And then finally, in the Return of the King, we see it reforged, and that's just one object that is used to such great effect with very little description to tell a story and to tell elements of those characters. And I think that's something that, for me personally, perhaps I'm biased because of the medium I work in, but for me personally, I think that's something that is achieved to a really high standard in the films. What do you think?
I 100% agree. I think that example of the Shards of Narsil is a perfect example, because in the books it's treated extremely differently, and the object's story itself is completely different, because Aragorn has it from much nearer to the beginning of the story in the books. It's not something that he's straying away from and wants to.
Yeah, he carries around the broken blade and fights with it. It doesn't just live in Rivendell as this almighty past ornament. It's with him. He uses it. He kills stuff with it. Yeah.
Whereas in the book, you can read a sentence that describes its importance, but in the movie, we need it to have. It's almost like a physical metaphor for his character arc. He's kind of broken and hiding away and shying away from the fact that he's destined to be king. And then when the sword is reforged, is kind of in line with him accepting his destiny. And it's, in my opinion, it's a very, very clever way of using something not insignificant, but using an object that's present throughout the book to kind of mirror Aragorn's journey and arc, I guess you could say.
I totally agree. It's the golden rule of. It makes oh my god, it makes perfect sense because it's the golden rule of screenwriting and filmmaking is to show and not tell. And that's something that you can do in a film kind of scenario. You show these things, you don't tell these things. And I think it also speaks to the age of the world. It feels like a very lived in. People talk about George Lucas and Star Wars and making a world that feels very lived in. But I would argue that I think the Lord of the Rings, Middle-earth is the epitome of that on screen and in literature, because it feels as though. It feels like it's been around for an age, and it has been around for an age. And I think they achieved that really well, talking about those kind of strands of history. You've got half-buried statues and broken remnants of things. It feels as though we're coming in at the end of this a long story, which in some respects we kind of are. Certainly in terms of the story of the elves and things like that. The Lord of the Rings is very much the end of that and kind of concludes that part of it. Which was started with the Silmarillion. So I think it achieves it perfectly. It's kind of a redundant question, I think, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Do you agree? It seems to me that the visual, from a filmmaking point of view, for your point of view as filmmakers, Does that just get you so excited? Because it gets me so excited seeing stuff like that.
I mean, yeah, the world building in general is just incredible. So, yeah, I mean, but it's even the fact just the way they went behind the scenes and built the sets did so much of that, the legwork for them as well. Because I think it was literally just a couple of days ago I saw it's like a memory thing, whereas 20 whatever years ago, the first update for the Lord of the Rings in production was ever put out, where they said we've started building Hobbiton, so the Shire, and with all that is where they planted everything. They let things build up naturally, like all the weeds grow naturally. They didn't put fake ones in, their actual plants, and they just built these doors, let nature take over a bit. So it was as though it was an actual lived-in piece of land. And I think that's partly what does so much of the selling to you, is that it's not CG, it's not just like polystyrene that's been built up. It's real. And when you want that world that needs to look like it's been lived in, and say you take the Shire for example, that's almost the unknown part of Middle Earth that's been lived in secret. So it can look so like almost pristine, but still a good part of nature. And they just did such a good job of building that up.
Yeah, and I think when you said it feels like a real world, it has a real history, in Lord of the Rings, that's 100% true. And I know you said we're going to touch on it maybe in a bit, but I think that's where The Hobbit fell short. You know, because there was a heavy reliance on CG. There's a lot of CG in Lord of the Rings, don't get me wrong, but so much more of it, like James said, the way they allowed the Shire to almost grow naturally, to make it feel lived in, to make it feel real, that was almost neglected for the most part in The Hobbit. And I think that's the major downfall. There's other things as well, but because real life isn't CG, it doesn't feel as real, you know, and that was the disappointment.
For sure. I totally agree, and we can look at The Hobbit for sure. I mean, because it's a perfect comparison, because you have the same world being adapted, and it's by the same author, by the same director, and so you know they're so part, and the same writing team, you know, the same production team. It's the same people across the board here that are doing both of these things in terms of book and film. And you're right. I think that the first thing that comes to mind when I think of The Hobbit is the CG reliance, and the fact that it doesn't feel as authentic. It doesn't feel as old. It doesn't feel as built up and as lived in. And I remember the third Hobbit film being titled as the defining chapter of the Middle Earth saga, and I remember thinking, what? No, it's not. It can't be. How can it be? You know, because to me, it really isn't. You know, and I don't even understand why you'd call it that.
No,
I think one of the biggest mistakes they ever made was, if they wanted it to go down that route, is making it the prequel to the Lord of the Rings that we already knew. It needed to be a new universe. It needed to be its own, set in its own land, like redesign stuff, make it. Because obviously the initial plan was to have Del Toro as the director, so much of the initial production was built off his ideas, and as you know from things like Pan's Labyrinth, he loves that more fantasy, I guess, whereas Peter Jackson went a lot more as though he was making a documentary with the Lord of the Rings. So I think, although Peter Jackson gets a lot of the flack for it, I feel like he kind of took over something that would not have been the way he would have gone about it at the beginning, but something that he couldn't change by the time he was forced into it.
Yeah. For sure. I mean, they quite famously as well with the Hobbit. I mean, yeah, we said about it at the beginning, but I'll reiterate that. You know, it's one very small children's book that has been adapted into three great big bloated films. And you know, again, looking at it in terms of adaptation, I think they quite famously. Correct me if I'm wrong, because you guys will know more about this than me. But they drew on the unfinished tales. Is that right?
A lot of the appendices,
and stuff.
Yeah, the appendices was one of the things they had. I'm not sure they had the unfinished tales.
No, that one, because they had the rights to The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, and a lot of the information through the history of Middle Earth is just in the appendices of Return of the King.
Yeah,
so a lot of it was that stuff.
Yeah, one of the best examples is the blue wizards that come with Gandalf, Saruman, and Radagast. So those the other two blue ones. They don't really get a mention in the appendices, but they half talk about it in The Hobbit, where Gandalf says. He's asked about the other wizards, and then Gandalf says the line about not remembering their names. That was just their clever way of mentioning something from the unfinished tales, but not actually saying names or anything because they weren't allowed. So yeah, generally it was just a few notes in the back. I say a few notes, a lot of notes in the back of the Lord of the Rings that they could take from.
Okay, so they were drawing from the appendices, right? I'm with you. So that's what so the entire kind of plot line of the necromancer and things like that coming into play there. Is that part of the Hobbit? Because I feel like that's part of the. I feel like that's an appendices thing.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's described in a couple of lines as like Gandalf and the White Council went to investigate in Dol Guldur.
It did happen. Like Sauron did regroup and head to Dol Guldur to kind of rebuild himself, I guess you could say. So it kind of does happen, but it's not this big event in the book.
Yeah, it's more like you get a timeline of going, this year he returned there, this year he was forced out, and then maybe in the middle they went investigated, then came back again.
But that's an example of something I think is the right thing to add in. When you've got something that happens within the timeline of your story, and in the book it's just like, oh, this happened then. If it is a big moment, like when you've got Sauron, Galadriel, Saruman, Elrond, and Gandalf all involved, that's something that we should be shown, I think. You know, and I think additions like that to The Hobbit were fantastic. I'm glad they were put there.
Yeah, that's the reason why I think The Hobbit should have been a 2-film series.
Yeah.
With a bit of, not bloatation, but a bit added, but definitely not enough for 3.
No.
Nowhere near.
Yeah, no, for sure not enough for 3. But I think that's kind of the half part of the problem with The Hobbit, though, as well, is that it feels like they're telling a couple of different films here. You've got this quite merry quest. The dwarves are off to the mountain to reclaim their gold, and aren't we all very pleased about it? Even though there's kind of some darker undertones there. It's a fun adventure, and off we go. And then parallel to that, you have a necromancer. And you have the darkness building and all this, that, and the other. And thematically and tonally, they feel at odds with each other. And I don't think the films ever actually get over that. I don't think they ever kind of make. I personally, I don't think it works, because from a story point of view, it's yeah, absolutely, let's include it. But from a tonal point of view, it feels so weird when we jump from this happy-go-lucky quest into this. So I wonder if perhaps you would have been better off making a The Hobbit film, just one, and then doing an additional, sort of this was happening whilst almost sort of film. And I don't know what
the Gandalf spin.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think I think that issue arises from trying to adapt a children's book while also making it fit in with make sense within Peter Jackson's Middle Earth. Because the Lord of the Rings trilogy kind of establishes this. It's not dark, but I mean, it's darker than the Hobbit book.
There is darkness.
So,
yes, for sure. And I think that the problem with the tonal balance between the happy adventure and the dark necromancer stuff, that comes from trying to blend those two things, I think.
And as well, something I should remember is that when Tolkien first wrote The Hobbit, he didn't have the Lord of the Rings, like he wasn't writing the Lord of the Rings as a plan afterwards. If I could definitely say that better. Yeah, he didn't plan to write the Lord of the Rings after The Hobbit initially. Like The Hobbit was just its own children's book. So all these things they tried to shoehorn in was not how Tolkien wrote it. Like, yes, he went back later and re-edited part of the Riddles in the Dark, the way that Bilbo got the ring off Gollum and things like that, because this ring that was, when he wrote The Hobbit, insignificant, became the whole thing behind the Lord of the Rings. So that had to change. But in general, the story didn't. So yeah, like you say, because it was a children's book, so it's never going to work that same way. And trying to force that to be the case is almost like you tried to keep it with that happy children theme, like the more fantasy happy journey type thing, epicness of it all. But then going, oh yeah, but also remember there's the really dark bit afterwards, and just well, like you said, it kind of flip-flopped in between and just didn't quite all come together.
I think while we're on that point as well, an interesting thing to bring up is you talked about how Tolkien went back and edited the Riddles in the Dark to make it fit. Well, one of the main complaints about the Hobbit trilogy, right, is the addition of Legolas as a pretty key character. Now, I've never been against that, because it's more than likely, even though not mentioned by name in the books, Legolas was probably involved. His father, the Elven King Thranduil, was a big part of the Battle of Five Armies, and Legolas was likely alive at this time, so why would he not be involved? Now, with the topic of Tolkien going back and re-editing to fit things, I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying that just before he died, he was scheduled to do another edition of The Hobbit. And a lot of people have theorized and suggested that he probably would have gone back and added Legolas, or at least named him in the Hobbit book. So, yeah.
That's so interesting. So that edition is perhaps in line with the thing that people seem to hate is perhaps in line with what Tolkien would have done himself.
Yeah, and I mean, if I was Tolkien and I had released Lord of the Rings, and God's sake, and I was going back to re-edit The Hobbit, I would definitely want to make it more of a cohesive, continuous story. I'd want I'd want it to be seamless. I'd want my key characters to be involved throughout, especially when they are immortal. You know, if you've got an immortal elf, you want them involved in their key battles. It brings more depth and more history to the characters.
Yeah, for sure. That's really I didn't know that. That's a really interesting thing. I think looking at the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit next to each other as films in adaptation sense, the thing that jumps out to me is that the Lord of the Rings are big, long films, and they are occasionally they take a long time to do things and a long time to say things, and they also take kind of long shots and the first sort of 20 minutes of the Lord of the Fellowship of the Ring is almost entirely expositional, and yet it takes the time to do that, and it takes the time to settle you into the world in a way that feels confident and the way it should be. Whereas the Hobbit, it feels as though it's taking the time, but it feels as though it's doing it because it has to. It doesn't feel as though it's doing it with the confidence that you have when you've got a great story that requires longer. It's doing it because it needs to fill 3 films, and it needs to we need to drag this out a little bit. For example, I maybe controversially, but I don't know, perhaps it's controversial, but I hate with a burning passion the dwarves throwing the plates around and singing their songs. It just seems stupid to me, and it just irritates the hell out of me, because it's just like, why are we doing this? Get on with it. Go save the treasure, you know?
But I think that goes back to what we were just saying. I think that's the problem with they're still trying to hold on to this is an adaptation of a kid's book, you know, and there are a lot of songs in Tolkien's books, and it's trying to hold on to that, which probably does please a lot of purists, I guess you would say. But again, like we said, it doesn't fit within the world that's already been established at all.
There's also things as well, like I might get this wrong. I believe it's Bofa in the movie sings. I can't think of what point he sings the "It's a merry old inn," which is one of the Hobbit songs in the Lord of the Rings. So they even take songs that aren't from that book, sung by the dwarves, and give them to them because of. I guess they were trying to introduce the songs rather than just one random one and not another. They kind of needed to be like, oh no, this is the thing here, even though the Lord of the Rings made the best decision on cutting the songs, apart from a little bit from Aragorn, but that's more of it's not a song.
Yeah.
It's
just funny as well when you compare that moment with the plates and stuff and that song to a scene just, I think it's probably within minutes later when they're sat around the fire and they sing far over. They're really like. Tonally, they are so different. I love that scene. I love that song, and I hate the plate song.
Yeah,
and it sticks out like a sore thumb. And again, that goes back to just being confused with: are we trying to adapt The Hobbit, or are we trying to make a prequel to the story we've already made? And I think they just blurred those lines.
Yeah,
and they just flip flop between the two, and it just doesn't work.
I think I totally agree, and I want to touch on music in the Lord of the Rings, because you have this. I think I don't know if it won anything in the end. I can't remember, but Howard Shore's score. That's difficult to say. What a weird thing to say. But his score, and obviously in the lore of Lord of the Rings, you know, this world was sung into being, and everything like that. What do you think about the significance of adapting some of Tolkien's music, and how successfully do you think it was done from a kind of book to film point of view?
Well, I think the first thing is there is a significantly less number or amount of songs that are performed and sung within the film than there are in the books. Like I don't know the exact number, but there are a lot of songs in the books.
Yes, and a lot of long ones.
Yes, and I will be completely honest, and this may make me a terrible fan. I have read the books, I don't know how many times, a lot, right? I tend to skip the songs. If I see a song, I just jump to the next normal paragraph. Obviously, I didn't when I first read the books, but reading them, for the 9th, 10th, 11th time, I just skipped them. So for me, I think that the songs that they kept within the movies, in the Lord of the Rings specifically, are there when they need to be, and they all work. And I'm very, very glad they cut out the majority of the songs that they did. As for Howard Shore, the film would not be the same without his actual score, because it's a masterpiece.
Yeah. I think he won 2 Oscars.
It is for sure.
I think he won for The Fellowship and Return of the King.
Yeah.
And he somehow didn't win one for Two Towers when he introduced the Rohan theme.
Oh.
I feel like you're probably going to get someone saying, no, I'm completely wrong with this, and it was just Return of the King. But I feel like it was the first and second. He somehow didn't get it for introducing Rohan, which everyone's like, Rohan is so iconic. How can you not win for that one?
It's beautiful, isn't it? And there's some great stuff out there about on analysis. I'm not a musician. You guys are not. But it is. There is some great stuff out there that you can see about the composition. Oh, whoa! Sorry. Apologies. You're a great and wonderful musician. Please give us more insight into the technicalities
I'm not quite
of Howard
Shore, but I'm getting there.
Well, give us your best rendition of any song from the Lord of the Rings.
Let's have the Rohan theme a cappella. Yeah, because you've got a big room behind you, if I remember rightly. You've got the orchestra in there in the beer hall. That's right. Yeah.
The swimming pool.
That's what I thought. Yeah, nice.
Yeah, the viewers don't see that. So
No, there's no need, is there? There's no need. Yeah, I mean, there's a load of great stuff that you can kind of go and find on the music of the Lord of the Rings, and I think that it's such a crucial element to get right in there because of the lore and because of the background and the nature of music and its importance in the fabric of Middle Earth. So it's a cool thing, and I think he nailed that in a way it's just above and beyond. But again, not so great in The Hobbit. I feel like the Hobbit is just a confused entity to me, and I think it just doesn't quite track. But we've kind of done that to death, I think, at this point. What do you think in terms of the impact on cinema that the Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit have had? How have they kind of what will they be remembered as, and how will they kind of what can we learn from them as well as filmmakers?
I want to say
big broad question again.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing and the most impactful thing it's had on cinema is the fact that me and James are filmmakers. Because without Lord of the Rings, we never would have got.
That is the biggest thing.
That's changed the world forever, But yeah, no. In all seriousness, you go.
That's it.
I was basically going to say the same thing. Right?
We just can't be serious, can we? I think. I mean, serious now. At the end of the day, Lord of the Rings is the most winningest film series ever, right? It won how many? 11, 13?
Yeah, it's won the joint most amount. No, Return of the King won the joint most amount of Oscars with Titanic and Ben-Hur. But then, obviously, as the series, I mean, what was it? You got like the Harry Potter series. Didn't win a single Oscar.
Yeah.
Nothing. And Lord of the Rings just smashed everything it came at.
And I think it's quite rare as well, especially up until that moment, for that type of genre film to do well at the Academy Awards, to win Oscars.
Okay.
So I think that goes to show that it kind of broke through. It's not just fantasy fans and fiction fans that enjoyed it. You know what I mean? But it kind of broke through and reached everyone. Just people that appreciate good cinema, good storytelling. So in terms of its impact on cinema going forward, I think its biggest impact and influence it had on other films was everybody wanted to have, I don't know how to describe it, like
a trilogy.
Well, yeah, for sure. But for lack of a better word, an epic. You know what I mean? Like Lord of the Rings is so big, it's so huge. It kind of made like all Hollywood films from that point on almost tried to be too big. If that makes sense, Yeah. So I don't necessarily know like if every impact it had and all the influence it had was positive. I think too many people were trying to live up to it, which is impossible. I think it was a once in a lifetime adaptation, a trilogy accomplishment.
Yeah, I think as well, it also had a big impact, possibly negatively as well in a way, and I mean it's in the nicest way. But where like Weta for Lord of the Rings, they basically invented the name escapes me now, the battle system where they could program like thousands of Uruk-hai, thousands of soldiers, and basically just make them fight in the background. Give them all like independent thought and reactions to each other as a computer program. And that was basically invented by Weta for the Lord of the Rings. And I feel like films since then have gone and taken that idea and tried to make like the main parts of their battles relying on that same kind of software. And that's where Lord of the Rings did such a good job with all the CGI and stuff it used, is they just tried to add a touch to things, and they complemented everything that they'd shot, as opposed to go, this shot is just full CG. So like, for example, with the Balrog, they went, okay, it's all dark, so we're just going to need lots of smoke. We're going to need to hide it as much as we can. It's a fire demon. There's going to be lots of black smoke. And that is a special effect that still holds up to this day, despite it being 20 plus years old. Whereas if that was done now, you know that they would try and go full on, probably way less smoke, try and see every defining like crack of lava on his skin, or however you choose to depict it.
Yeah.
And it just wouldn't have the same effect.
No. And I think when you're talking about the CG in the battles and the software for that as well, I think that got kind of lost when people went, this software is available for our big epic battle sequences. We can just do this. I think the way it was used in Lord of the Rings was sparingly used, and it was only really used to show scale, right? So the majority of the fight scenes and the battle sequences in Lord of the Rings are in relatively tight. We're looking at our key characters, and then every now and again we get a big wide to show you there are 10,000 Uruk-hai here, and that establishes how big and epic of a battle this is. Whereas future films and filmmakers go, this software is available, we can just show our entire battle sequence using this, and they kind of forget to tell a story within it. You look at Helm's Deep in the Two Towers, that sequence, that battle is a story in itself. And if it was all shown through CGI and, okay, let's use this software now to tell our story, it wouldn't work. It's because they focus on the characters. We have Aragorn's story, we have Legolas and Gimli, we have Theoden, we have Haldir in the film, all these things are being told, all these stories are being told. And then, the climactic scene with Gandalf arriving with the Rohirrim, it's all one complete story in itself. And that gets lost when people have looked at Lord of the Rings as a template and gone, they use this CG software for a battle sequence, it did really well, we'll use it for ours. But it's not being used to the same effect. Does that make sense? I kind of start rambling and I go,
which is probably, and I'm like, it makes perfect sense. It did. I loved it. It was great. I think it's kind of a good word on the Hobbit there as well. Is again, to look at that comparison, is that you have the Battle of the Five Armies, which is in every way a bigger event than Helm's Deep, and it's if you believe the marketing, it's the defining chapter. Really bugs me. But in every way it's technically bigger, but but in fact Helm's Deep is so much more thrilling, so much more exciting, and so much more kind of intriguing as a set piece. So yeah, I think it's a perfect way of looking at it there. I really, really do. Ultimately these films are, I think, the Lord of the Rings certainly put the story first and the characters first, as you said. And I think that's, for me, is the lesson of this as a writer, is that story always comes first. And if you can put the story first, then you're going to end up with a good film down the line. And I think that's the lesson of the Lord of the Rings and the cautionary tale of the Hobbit. And that seems like a nice roundup.
No, yeah. I completely agree. I think story should always come first, and when you've got a good, solid story, then you can use really nice visuals and really nice soundtracks and scores to complement your story, rather than, again, for the Hobbit, trying to use big, epic visuals to tell your story, to get your story across. It should be the other way around. These things should complement your story, rather than your story being a backside to your visuals, which is how the Hobbit felt. I think that's the main difference.
Yeah, for sure.
In comparison to what I said
100%. Earlier. Guys. No, look, guys, thank you so much for joining today. This has been this has been great. It's great to have your input on the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit and Middle Earth. Generally, you guys are the pros in this arena, both from a general filmmaking point of view and also for Middle Earth. So I thank you very, very much for coming, and come back sometime. We'd love to have you again.
Yeah, for sure. Yes. It's been fun. We spend all day talking about Middle Earth anyway, so this was no dramas at all.
Always nice to get it on film. Yeah. Nice one. Thank you. Thanks very much, guys. Go head over to the Broken Sword YouTube channel. Check it out. There's loads of great stuff. If you are interested in anything that we've spoken about here, then you will find something over there that will tickle you. It's a great thing. It's a really great thing.